Great Migration, some gentrification, struggle against racism. The film left me feeling like the power of capitalism, the political system, the economic system, it really felt overwhelming. And so I did feel some of the community resilience and resistance, but it felt like at odds with just the incredible power of this. And it also brought up for me just noticing the racism and classism of the well-intentioned as well as the greedy.
As you noticed in the town hall meeting, the height of emotions that was in that room. And I think it's important, as we know in our community, sometimes when we talk about communities, it's very precious. It may be somewhere that we tread through. And for others, it's where the only place they can live. Maybe they haven't been able to live in other parts of the city or country. But home is very precious to some people. And I found, I'm not an original person. I'm actually from Mars. I'm originally from St. Louis. I've lived many places. I lived in Chicago, went to school in Colorado, I lived overseas, and I've been in New York about the past 17 years. I found through making this film, Harlemites are very protective of Harlem. It's their baby. They're nurturing it. They may have nurtured that baby for 80, 100 years, but they're very, very wary of who is going to step on it and hurt it. And I had never experienced that anywhere else in many places I've lived. So I try to, as you all know, I'm very educated here. I mean, it's a conference for a reason, but I challenge people in other scenarios when I'm showing the film on how we talk about communities and how we discuss them. It's not just a place to be laying our heads. It's precious. It's home. It's where generations have been rooted. And we take care of it. And I think sometimes we have to look deeper beyond just a place where you pay rent. It's a place that people consider their legacy and carrying on. And sometimes they don't want to go anywhere. This is where we want to remain. Anyone else have some thoughts about what they wrote down they want to share?
I thought about the Harlem Renaissance, the Nation of Islam. I'm not saying I'm younger, but the rap group The Diplomats, Cameron and Dipset, like I'm a big fan of those, so I thought about them. Brownstones, 125th Street in Lenox, Dapper Dan, Paid in Full, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, and Money. And what was interesting to me was that the people who supported gentrification, it wasn't exclusively white. It was like, there were a lot of like middle-class black people who like very much supported what was going on. So it didn't, I don't know, it seemed like the overarching theme was like that it was like white people were coming into Harlem and, you know, wanted to change it, but at the same time it was like black people who were coming into Harlem and wanted it to change. So I kind of want to like, it's interesting to see like how race and money is like not necessarily interchangeable.
One thing that, I don't know who's been in New York, but one thing that's different about Harlem is Harlem always had this amazing housing stock. The brownstones are there. As you can see, the history, people abandoned them. The stock was always there. And in the 80s, the city nobody cared about it. And then there were initiatives. Brownstones were being sold for $1, $5, $6, whatever, $100. There's redlining that we experienced. But the stock was there, unlike any other places in the city. So when it became safe to move back to Harlem or invest in Harlem, as other outsiders want to say, the stock was there, as opposed to other places where you have to build and build and build, which is very different. And they needed people to come. They're like, we have the stock, it's about money, it's about bringing it back, we can reinvent it. So on that note, talking about how Harlem, it's just a little quadrant within Manhattan, but Manhattan is where the money is, where business is, capital is. And as we know, everyone wants to move back to urban cities. That notion of suburban life is old. Everyone wants to be right here in the mix. Nobody wants to get on a train. Nobody wants to travel. And so that shift of living in the city is popular. Who wants to like a fence? Nobody wants to drive anymore. That's where they're pushing people who don't have money. It's farther and farther away. So I'm curious to hear, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit with Halima and Aaron on the work that they're doing here. I'm curious, I personally, I don't know, I would like to hear just what the rebuilding is going on here in Detroit, and what's the focus? Is it, I don't know. It's like you all can stand up or
So I'll just speak first in the interest of time, briefly, from right here. I see this, what is very similar is a lack of wanting to get to know people and a lack of value for people who are in a place, and value being placed on the physical built structure as opposed to maybe even both, but you know, first is the people, because that is a community. It's the people, it's the family, it's all of the invisible structures that allow us to trust one another, etc. So I see that there is a incapacity for people with capital to want to cohabitate with people who are in a place, and I see that as being very similar there and here. We also have like an amazing housing stock, and we also have these kind of same policies that driven by real estate, you know, buy low, sell high. Like, it's really simple. It happens all over the country. You know, you don't invest in a place. If a little bit of water over 10 years will bring a giant building down. Everybody knows that. So if you don't have the investment to do just the minor repairs, things fall down. Oh, now we have to invest millions. And that's exactly what, you know, developers want to do. So I think there's also a misconception that officials, politicians, are not, you know, they have the public interest at heart. I think that's a broad-based misconception. You know, if you get sued, what is it called? Corporation counsel. It's a business. And they're about making money and developing where they can. So I'll leave it there and pass it to you.
Cool. I just want to thank you again, Shawn, for the film. I thought it was really, really great. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. There were so many parallels, right, between what's going on in Detroit and what's happening in Harlem. The thing that jumped out to me most was like the profound need for racial healing and the history of how race has been used by capitalism as a way to basically create economic activity at the expense of black communities, people of color communities, their bodies. Literally, like in Harlem, the example of like, oh shoot, we built too much housing, we need to put some black people here to fill these units, right? And in Detroit, we have a similar situation of bringing folks in as labor, right, to build cars, and then this massive outflux, the white flight, the building of freeways through black centers of economic and political power, I-75, 696, the Lodge, all displaced that so that white people could leave, right? And now we're seeing this, the reversal of that. Like, there was literally an event the other day called Homecoming Detroit, which was sponsored by like a conglomeration of big money businesses, basically explicitly targeting wealthy suburbanites who had left, who literally abandoned the city to come home. And this is happening even as the city was facing the largest tax foreclosure in United States history, as 30,000 people are having the water cut off to their homes, as people are not having access to decent food or culturally appropriate food, and as their stories and culture are being erased, literally, the way somebody said earlier. And I think there's this idea that you know, like, to me, like, all of this land is sacred, right? It's the place where our stories live. But we're living in a society that commodifies it, right? That says it can be bought and sold, supply and demand. But it doesn't take into account the people, right, who are there. So there's this big narrative in Detroit about the so-called redevelopment of Detroit, and people keep saying Detroit's coming back. But what I see is that, like, the people that I'm close to, that I care about, that I'm involved in this work with, they're being forced away. And what's happening is that new buildings are coming up, but they're not benefiting the people who live around there. And it's not that there's a shortage of money, it's that it's not profitable to be with or provide services to lower income communities, right? And so there's like this whole narrative in Detroit that I really want to challenge, and I know other folks in this room are challenging through their work, around the idea that that it would be even possible to come up with market-based solutions to problems that the market created, right? Like this disinvestment, the dislocation of people, the like slumminess of certain communities that was a direct result of like capital flight and racism and exploitation. We can't incentivize a solution to that through money, right? It has to come through challenging some of the sort of dominant systems that exist right now.
What is some of the work that Detroit, your People's Platform does?
Yeah, so People's Platform is like a membership organization that touches on areas of transportation justice, land justice, food justice, good governance, and good jobs. A lot of the work that I'm involved in has to do with land and housing right now. And so one of the things that I do personally is facilitate the Community Land Trust Collective. So there's a group of folks all around the city who actually organized themselves before I was involved around a big land grab that happened on the east side near where Andrew used to work. A billionaire bought up 200 acres of land and in order to build a tree farm, in theory, right? Really what it is it's a land grab, like plain and simple. Whatever he says about it, he's already said it's basically a trust fund for his children, right? And this is really valuable land because all land is valuable, but particularly this is right on the river, right? It's very close to a very wealthy community, very well positioned. And 500 people came out to city council to protest that. Everybody, like in that video, really passionate, well-spoken, well-reasoned folks, and the city council approved it anyway. And so this group of folks kind of said, obviously we don't have real public representation here. Obviously, even when we lift up our voices, they don't care. There's a quote that somebody said there, they don't care about us in Harlem. And so we needed to take what was a reactionary strategy, community land trust, and turn it into a visionary organizing strategy to say, the systems that are in place right now where we stand up and we ask and we say, please will you sell us this land, or please will you not sell this other person this land that is going to be used to exploit us, we have to take it back, right? Like we can't keep asking permission, and we broadly, folks who are invested in keeping communities intact and in the right to remain and reclaim the city have to start owning land, because I think, as much as I would like to say, yes, let's go back to a place where nobody owns land, that's not realistic in this current context. It's just not. We can't get from where we are now to that place. And so the next solution is looking towards ways to buy land, but then hold it in a structure like a community land trust that sort of diffuses an individual's interest and instead prioritizes the interests of the broader community. It preserves affordability. It allows space for community economic development, right? Stuff that still, it doesn't require that the massive revolution happens, but it does cause kind of like a revolution in how we think about what a community is and what development is. And part of we use these tools to help build political power, because ultimately we want to replace these folks who are failing to represent.
Halima, do you want to talk about some of the work that you've done? No.
Super concisely, I'm working on co-op incubation, alternative energy solutions, community health, land for public use, and co-designed public art spaces in the city.
I wanted to say one other thing about as far as if folks are interested in policy related stuff in Detroit, the community benefits agreement fight in Detroit is really big, because to that point that there's plenty of money, they just gave a billionaire $350 million to build a stadium in Detroit, when we know that there's not a single example anywhere in the country that actually produces positive economic development for the host city. It loses money. Every single stadium in the country loses money for the city that subsidizes it. And so Detroit was going through a bankruptcy, and they did it anyway, even though they had all these people saying, please, for the love of God, this doesn't make any financial sense. They did it. So we've been in the city really fighting hard for what we call a community benefits ordinance, which would require that if there's public investment above $15 million in a project, there has to be a legally enforceable agreement that's negotiated by the affected community. And so that's a tool that it exists in other places. The one stadium that did have positive economic development was in Pittsburgh, and that was because it had a community benefits agreement. So that's another thing that we're really fighting for hard here. People's Platform is just a member of a larger coalition fighting for that too. But it's a tool to kind of leverage community voice and power, although enforceability is always hard too.
I just have a quick question. I know a long time ago or whatever, but are either one of you doing any workshops?
I'm not this weekend.
We just did. Yeah, she just did a workshop.
You just did. It's over.
But happy to connect.
Okay.
Definitely connect.
Yeah, Shawn, I have a question for you in terms of some of the learnings maybe that you could share in terms of the changing faces of Harlem from where you stopped in the 2007, 2000.
Really the last thing is 2012, just a little wrap up.
2012. So it's now 2015, and so if we could fast forward 3 years, the businesses that the young lady mentioned in the video, Harlem Toonie Room is no longer there. The Human Bookstore is no longer there. Society Coffee is no longer there. And so I work for a nonprofit organization that is advocating for locally owned small businesses that are owned by entrepreneurs that are in the neighborhood. And I'm just wondering, if you're in the city of Detroit right now, there's a lot of incentives that are being pushed and given towards small business owners in the form of grants, in the forms, every time you turn around there's some type of contest where a small business owner can win money, right, to open up a business. And what I'm concerned about is that those businesses, Human Bookstore, the bowling alley, Harlem Lane, they all opened on the backs of African American people. But when Harlem, when it became attractive, or they were able to get market rate, they pushed all those entrepreneurs out, except for Princess, because she's still there, with Brownstone. But all the rest of those entrepreneurs, they pushed them out, and now, Human Bookstore is turning into a fucking Buffalo Wild Wings. I mean, it's just atrocious as to what's happening, and I'm just wondering, I try so hard to advocate for locally owned, minority-owned businesses. I just want to make sure that when they do get a spot in Detroit, someplace, that they can at least hold on to it.
Well, in Harlem, they have an organization called Harlem Business Alliance. Are you familiar with them? And the reason I bring them up is there's two businesses I can say early on that when it came down to it, that was the organization that helped them with a business tool. And one of them is Valerie's, I couldn't even mess her up, she's a hair salon. National Hair Salon, and Davila Jackson Preston, who is the architect of the film. And the one, the names all escape me. I cannot remember her name, she's one of the presidents of Harlem Business Alliance. But I say they've changed and restructured and had to get with 2015. But they provide, a lot of us don't have business tools. We don't. And some of us, we need to get a little training and I hope that in Detroit there's a local business support that is for small businesses that they can go to get training and help and assistance. And the Harlem Business Alliance is only as good as the businesses that support it and they give it back. And so recently I had a screening back in Harlem where we co-sponsored with them, and it was interesting to hear, I can't remember her name, but to hear her speak about growing up in Harlem and having her father had taught her the importance of business and staying, whatever odds you had to, because once you're gone, nobody remembers you. And teaching ourselves, you don't have your small businesses, what's community?
Exactly.
That's the backbone.
And so I just wanted to comment real quick. Aaron, is that your name?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment because you talked about how important it is for us to own land. And I just think to piggyback on that, how important it is for business owners to own the damn building.
That's what,
right?
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
totally.
Because the reason why Sylvia's up in Harlem has been able to stay there for 50 years is because Sylvia owns the building, right? And so it's just so important. I mean, how many times are we going to pick up the paper in the Detroit News and see another small business that's minority-owned closed? Guess what? They don't own the building.
Well, that's true. there too, because the redlining is very real. On Edward Sisters Realty, one of the oldest black-owned real estate companies in Harlem, to hear the father talk about how he couldn't get a loan from the bank, and he's in real estate with his business and had to go to New Jersey, is absurd, but that's real. That's very real. And one of the screenings I had at City College, a woman spoke and said she couldn't get a loan from whatever bank, but fortunately, the reason I bring this up is sometimes you got to think outside the box. Sometimes you have to maybe your family, we all want to do it. Maybe it's 20 of you that own that brownstone, but with the stake in property, you have a lot more leverage. And she talked about how the owner of the brownstone let her pay him to own it, and that's how she paid it off. And, I mean, that's not going to happen to everyone, but she said that was the deal that they made. I don't know how long it took. She didn't even bank, they didn't even bank. That's how she bought the building. And I say that to say sometimes there are programs on low-income housing. There's this much stock that's there. There's programs, there's HCCI, Harlem Congregations Community Improvement. There's certain housing groups that are there, and you have to qualify with your income. It's difficult to find where those houses are, and it's very small where it is, but it's also training on ourselves and ownership, and the importance of ownership, because New York, I don't know how it is in Detroit, New York's mostly a rental city, but you have more leverage in ownership of business and in residential. Anyone have questions? Yes, ma'am?
Yeah.